Good morning. Well, it's morning for me. It's almost afternoon for you,
It
right?
is almost afternoon. I'm getting there.
Yeah. It's still early in the day. All sorts of horrible things could still happen here, and it would just be morning in California. Good things should happen too, theoretically, right?
Good things could happen.
Yeah.
I'm going on vacation. That's good.
That's exciting. Where are you
Vacation
going?
in quotation marks.
Yeah, I know. What will you be doing on vacation?
I'm going to Asheville for a week uh, in the mountains of North Carolina, and then I'm going further into the mountains of North Carolina to seek a social isolation.
Wow. All right.
My hope is that any disease I could confront will be drowned by uh, alcohol and visits to breweries.
Huh.
We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, all
Uh,
right.
and then in the mountains, I hope to see no one. We'll
Okay.
see how that goes.
Well, that's fun.
You know, so
Enjoy that.
yeah, looking forward to it. It's
Um,
my anniversary today.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. I've been married 17 years
Goes by
to the
fast.
same person.
Good job.
That's an achievement.
It is. I agree with you. It is an achievement to be celebrated. That's great.
Hooray! What you been up to?
um, uh, I mean, nothing super exciting that I can talk about. Nothing to speak of, really. Just getting through life here, working on various writing projects, and uh, you know, our social isolation. Uh, just a weird summer with the kids, like because they can't really do anything much, so that makes it hard. But we're doing okay. Watching lots of movies and stuff. Um, we watched the Eurovision movie on Netflix last night. Have you seen this? Do you know what this is? Okay, it's a Will Ferrell movie, um, made for Netflix, and it's pretty funny. Um, are you familiar with the Eurovision Song Contest?
Yeah, like that
Okay.
much.
Well, this is an American film uh, about the Eurovision Song Contest, starring Will Ferrell and Rachel McAdams as two people from Iceland who've grown up in a small Icelandic village who, since they were children, have sung together and desperately want to be in the win the Eurovision Song Contest. That's their big dream. And I mean, whether you find Will Ferrell's shtick to be funny or not is really going to go a long way towards just you liking the movie or not, because it's sort of very much in line with his sort of angry, egotistical doofuses doing ridiculous things. Um, Sort of mode of of film, a little bit less of an edge than some of the more egregious examples of that. But it's funny, and it's not perfect. It's as far as Will Ferrell comedies go, I tend to really particularly like the high absurdist ones, like Anchorman or Step Brothers, the best, where their sort of unhinged impulses are given total free reign. And this is much more sort of pedestrian's not the right word, but normal. It's a movie that normal people could watch, but there's just enough weirdness in it to also be enjoyable. It's not like A+ material from them, but it's fun. And Rachel McAdams is very, very good in it too. They have a fun dynamic. So
All right, I'm
I
putting it on my list.
Yeah,
Assuming
I
I can
recommend.
get a signal in the mountains.
Available on Netflix for
Delightful.
everyone to watch now. And it does feature a lot of past Eurovision Song Contest winners, which is funny. Like there's this extended song sequence that features a whole bunch of them, which, if you're a big fan of Eurovision, presumably it would be very exciting. I only happen to know who, like a couple, it took about, it's a long song sequence. It took about a minute for me to realize, oh, all of these people I think are Eurovision winners. So it would probably play like gangbusters in a very different way to somebody who was familiar with these people. Um, and the novelty of Eurovision in and of itself is it adds a dimension of weirdness to it to probably people who aren't familiar with it. If you ever watch Eurovision though, it's an extremely accurate portrayal of what that thing is, which if you've never seen it before is going to be astounding that it is not one bit heightened from what the actual thing is at all. So go and watching that, and then maybe go down a YouTube rabbit hole for Eurovision because it's truly amazing. It's one of these things that really gives you this sense of like the sensibilities of the pop and popular cultural sensibilities of Europe, broadly speaking, are very very different from Americans. Like it's like, oh, we're not like normal in any real sense. We're just what we are, and they are what they are, which is a really different thing. So check it out, it's fun. You've been consuming any interesting media recently?
I consumed nothing.
Ah,
I haven't consumed anything. Nothing.
right. Well, fair enough. That's probably good. It means you've been productive.
I hope, I hope to get into Perry Mason.
Yeah, that looks interesting,
Yeah,
right?
that's on my list.
Um, did you ever watch the Raymond Burr Perry Mason series when you
Yeah,
were a
like
kid,
I
like in
saw episodes
syndication?
in syndication when I was like a very young person.
I've never seen a single episode of the original Perry Mason, so I have no emotional connection to this. But I do like, oh, what's his name? What's the actor's name?
Matthew Reese.
Yeah, I do like Matthew Reese. I enjoyed The Americans very much and liked the Mister Rogers movie last year.
Mm.
Uh, and so I am interested in seeing that. It's interesting because Robert Downey Jr. and his wife are the producers on that, and originally he was supposed to play that part when they sort of were developing it, which might have been interesting. In this weird era where movie stars are doing like the biggest movie stars on earth just like pop into TV every once in a while. I have a friend who's a working actress who it irritates to no end what television is like right now because 10 years ago she would, like, a person with her resume and in her career position would certainly be like a series regular on a sitcom or something, like, or a TV show at this point, a drama or whatever. And now all those parts are going to movie stars, which is upsetting in our weird little constricted entertainment economy where there aren't as many opportunities in movies anymore
There's
because they
no
don't make
opportunity
money.
in anything.
Yeah, I know.
We're developing, well, as you know, I'm in the live entertainment business, and nobody's figured it out yet. But
Yeah.
but but the thing that makes me most frustrated actually is not that we haven't figured it out because it's a complex problem, but the like um the 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 groups of people who get angry at the other groups of people who are trying to figure it out. Do you know what I mean? Like there's this
Yeah.
whole segment of the population that's like we're going to do nothing for 3 years or whatever it happens to be, and I'm like that's a really great privileged endowed often place to operate from, and
Right.
uh, I just think there has to be some sort of place in the middle. That's me.
Do you find are you getting a lot of pushback from people, or they're?
I'm personally not getting any pushback directly,
Mm-hmm.
but also we're being pretty conservative about
Yeah,
the
it
way
seems to
we
me.
undertake things. But the circles I run in, certainly there are very very strong opinions that are sort of like pushing. Like we don't need to be no live events whatsoever. It's unethical. It's all of this, and I think I just think there's a step back from that also makes sense
Yeah.
and that is responsible.
Well, yeah, I mean, you would think so. It's a frustrating thing about the moment that we're living in right now is that it feels like everybody's position seems to get like pushed to weird poles in some ways. And I mean, I couldn't say this for sure, but it seems to me that what you're talking about is partly a politicized response as
Mm-hmm.
well right now, where people feel this need to sort of hold certain lines just to emphasize to people that this is the right thing to do, and it's just making, I don't know, for massive dysfunction in every sector of our country. That's super fun too. um yeah, I don't know, I mean, you probably saw this, like the uh that Florida town hall that they had where a whole bunch of people were getting up and angrily, denouncing the plan to have people in the town wear masks.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see this?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? Well, it's easily found like on Twitter or just lurking around on the internet. And I mean, it's like people like it's a group of women um, who sort of one after the other got up and just angrily screamed about why wearing masks is this horrible thing. And it's funny because somebody cut it together with footage from Parks and Recreation of people sitting in the of responses to listening to people in town halls like say crazy things, and it just doesn't fits right in there, slots right in. But it is sort of this example of it's like, what? How do you have such strong feelings about this? It's like this, this people. You couldn't be asked to do less. Do you know what I mean? It's like as far as the thing goes, it's like just put a thing on your face when you go outside. It's really not that hard. And apparently could do a lot. But like people just have these super intense, strong feelings. And it's like, I don't think you actually have strong feelings about this, right? This isn't what you have strong feelings about. You have strong feelings about something else. And this is the thing that, you're using, you're diverting that into. And it's like, and that just seems like all of our conversations now. It's like, people getting mad at you guys for doing anything. It's like, you don't really think this is a bad idea. You think something else is a bad idea, but this is the thing that you're using to make that argument. And like these dumb proxy arguments for like bigger political, philosophical disagreements is a frustrating, uh, you know, thing of the moment. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's yeah, it's what you're saying. It's people are in a moment where they do not have control. No one does, and are looking for opportunities to express and assert the control they have, which is really over their own opinion, and that's about it.
Yeah.
You can kind of control your response. I mean, some people can, but and that's kind of what we're seeing as a.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, it is a moment where people, I think, feel so helpless. And so all you can do is, try and, it's the same thing I think that leads to conspiracy sort of theories in general is people looking for some way to get a handle on what are essentially sort of inexplicable or things that don't really have any meaning. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's terrifying, right? To live in a completely disordered world that doesn't, where, you know, awful things happen and they don't actually mean anything is very upsetting. And so I think people find comfort in saying, you know, it's the fault of, you know, whatever evil force or whatever, or it's a representative of some horrendous thing. And it's like, yeah, bad thing maybe just happened. And that, that's not satisfying in any way, but my personal feelings, it might be closer to the truth than anything else. So, oh, that's super fun. You know what else I've been watching? Started watching the sequel to The Shining last night, the Doctor Sleep movie. Did you ever? It just hit HBO Max this weekend. Um, Came out. Are you aware of this movie?
Mm-hmm.
It yeah. I asked because it did not do well in theaters. Doctor Sleep. It was kind of a flop. But it turns out to be an interesting film, especially because it's doing this fascinating thing where it's based on Stephen King's sequel that he wrote to The Shining, Doctor Sleep. Um, and Stephen King famously does not like Stanley Kubrick's Shining film adaptation starring Jack Nicholson. Uh, but the movie Doctor Sleep adapts The Shining, or adapts the Doctor Sleep book with Ewan McGregor as a grown-up, Danny Torrance as the kid in the original book and film. But aesthetically, it is it's not a remake; it's a direct sequel to Stanley Kubrick's Shining, and it's sort of him marrying together Stephen King's sort of preferred, I think, approach to the Shining world and universe with the aesthetics of Stanley Kubrick, and it's a fascinating film. Mike Flanagan made it. He's the guy who did the Haunting of Hill House miniseries on Netflix. Did you see that? It, you know, he's not.
I should say I saw it in the daytime on purpose.
That's well, yeah, that's a good call. That is it. It's a terrifying miniseries, right? I mean that it it's hard to find something that's genuinely unsettling. And Flanagan, you know, he's not Kubrick in terms of his visual style. He's perfectly fine, you know, visually, but you know, Kubrick is Kubrick, whatever. And so in that way, there feels something a little sacrilegious about trying to make a sequel to, you know, to a Kubrick movie, especially one as beloved as The Shining. And but Flanagan is really good with horror surrounding children, and also sort of legacy familial issues like that. That's something he did particularly well in The Haunting of Hill House, and it's a skill set that applies really quite well to Doctor Sleep, which is a really irritating title. Every time I say it, I like find myself cringing a little bit internally. But that aside, it's good. It's good. I recommend it. And for fans of The Shining, it really pays off. The Shining film, Kubrick's The Shining, as well as the book, it pays off in really interesting ways at the end of the film. The director's cut is available alongside the theatrical cut on HBO Max, and I would recommend the director's cut for anyone interested. And you can it's 3 hours long. You can watch it in chunks, but it's worth looking at. It's a good film.
All right, it's something else on my list.
Add it to the list.
Hooray!
Actually, what we were planning on sort of discussing for the main bulk of our conversation or discussion here today, something else to add to the list.
Alexander Hamilton.
That's right. Disney Plus is going to be releasing their filmed production of, well, their film version of the original production of Hamilton, starring Lin-Manuel Miranda and the original cast on Disney Plus. And that is happening on the 3rd of July, which is just a few days away from us. So we thought it was a good opportunity to talk about Hamilton. Jeremy, you want to kick us off? What are your thoughts?
I love it. I think it's how do I say this? We're talking about Hamilton a lot this week, and I have lots to say about it, but nothing I don't think that's not been said before.
Sure.
But at the risk of being too much of a fanboy, I mean, I just think it's maybe the most important piece of popular culture in the last decade. And on top of that, it's just really, really good, like almost impeccably so. And yeah, and the thing that I think I appreciate most about this particular moment is that the creator and distributors of the piece recognized the moment and like changed their approach with regard to how it's going to be released and their business model essentially entirely in relatively short order to get it in front of eyeballs now. And we didn't know, they didn't know at the time. I'm not sure they knew at the time that I can't remember if it was like right before the George Floyd stuff. It might have been a few weeks before, but I
Yeah, the announcement that it was coming to Disney Plus did happen on that day. Did happen before all of this happened.
yeah. So I yeah, because my memory is that there were sort of it was a gift, a response to coronavirus, and it turns out that it's going to be
Has
going to a lot more because of the moment.
additional potential interesting thematic resonances with our current moment. Yeah, the original plan for this particular thing was that it was going to come out in theaters, I believe, next year. Was the intention, and it was going to be a theatrically distributed film by Disney. And yeah, as you say, it was they changed their plans because of the coronavirus situation to put it out on Disney Plus, which I agree was a good idea. It's a good thing to do. I am in agreement with you about Hamilton in general. It's and your assertion that it might be the most important piece of pop culture in the last 10 years. I think there's a strong case to be made for that. That doesn't sound hyperbolic. It might even be, you could make you might even be able to make an argument of the 21st century so far in the United States. There's been no other, piece of art that's as important, at least pop cultural, pop art, that's as important or meaningful or influential as Hamilton. As fascinating that it's a piece of theater, certainly it's the most important piece of theater for, I mean, I don't know how far back you would. Important's a hard thing to say. I mean, it depends on how we're describing important, but it's the most popular thing that's happened in theater since I mean, the last thing that had any kind of comparable impact on pop culture that I can imagine, or broad, culture, is Rent back in the mid 90s, and Hamilton's far, far larger than that ever was. I think that you have to go back to almost mid-century to find, a piece of theater that was as broadly disruptive in the culture as Hamilton has been, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are others that come to mind. I mean, in terms of, but none of them are this big, as you say. Book of Mormon was the thing,
Yeah,
sort of in
yeah.
between.
I mean,
Um,
yes, that's true.
and you know, you've got Les Miserables in there, and you have Cats in there, and
Yeah,
that
the
was a joke. That was a
no,
joke.
well, they're reasonable. I mean, that's the thing, though. They are reasonable things
But it is the thing
to
that's
talk about.
surprising about it is what you point to, which is here is this piece of theater in a sort of post theater culture.
Hmm.
The first, it truly in the first, not the first, but the one that's had the most impact in the digital age
Yeah,
is this piece.
yeah.
And of course, it is a piece that incorporates the digital age because of its music. I mean, its genre
Hmm.
is sort of necessarily built around technology in ways that some of those others aren't. That aren't built around the specific technology of hip hop and so anyway, I mean, part of
No,
my
you're right.
argument about Hamilton is that it's everything that's been happening sort of in edge theater um, for for a while now. I mean, at least 20 years.
Well,
It
particularly in terms of its staging conventions.
yeah, it and here it is, sort of. So I mean, the material is so good that it sort of culminated. It's That's what I'm trying to say. It's the culmination of everything Edge Theater has been trying to do for a while. Um, and yeah, it
Maybe
also
define
happens
what
to
you
be really,
mean.
really
What
good.
do you mean by edge theater when you
I
say
mean,
that?
in the theater, the off Broadways,
Mm.
the Village Theater, the avant garde places. So the in theater, the move has been, I think this is right. I'm willing to be corrected, but I think the general trend has been, while film technology has been going towards the spectacular, theater theaters have done one of two things. They've gone the sort of commercial Disney route. I mean, we have to talk about
Sure.
Disney when we talk about this now. They've gone the high production, high spectacular route, or they've gone this disintegrated, post structural, um,
It's like
um,
your Ivan Van Ho
yeah,
sort of
broken out. And this is that. It's
Brechtian
actually
kind
a
of thing.
marriage of both of those things, I think. But it is the culmination of that second kind, I think.
Yeah, no, its staging is very much in keeping with that kind of highly theatrical and minimalist, and those theatrical design trends. Like um, so, yeah, it is very much in line with that, while at the same time married to this sort of unabashedly pop sensibility. In part, that's conveyed through the music, but then it's interesting though because it's like while the thing that is interesting about it is it's pretty good hip hop music. Um, it's pretty good, you know, for that, which is a tough thing to do. Like musical theater that draws on popular musical styles uh, is famously, that you can get good theater, you can get pretty good songs out of it for theater, but there's always an asterisk next to it a little bit. It's like, the theater version of rock is never really rock. You know what I mean? And theatrical versions of hip hop, uh, I don't think anyone's ever really done a credible job of it up to this point on this scale before. And it's legitimately good. But maybe there is a little bit of I mean, the thing is also this got actual radio airplay, like the songs, and honestly, you do have to go back to the '80s since you can find to find any hits that like legitimate radio hits that came from a show to, a show. And that would have been in the middle of the sort of, Andrew Lloyd Webbery, Bobel Schoenberg, uh, or chess, which, while we're talking about it, and the Eurovision Song Contest too, that era has one of the craziest show tunes ever to make it into like actual radio airplay from chess. It's the sort of One Night in Bangkok song. And every time I hear that song on the radio, like on an oldies thing, it blows my mind that song became a major hit. It's a fun one to listen to. I don't deny that at all. Written by the, written by the songwriters of ABBA. And they didn't do the lyrics on it, but it was their music, and you can hear that in there. Yeah, Eurovision Song Contest winners ABBA. And what's amazing about it is the lyrics of that thing are so specific, so specific to that play and the events happening in it, and it has this great hooky sort of chorus. It's like One Night in Bangkok, and the people singing, and you can hear that and like rest on it. But I cannot imagine what any normal person in the 80s was thinking when the lyrics started on that. And the guy's talking about chess, and he's talking about like European resort villages and all this. It's like, what do you think this song is? What do you think this song is to like a normal person? And they probably aren't listening, but you just imagine somebody in the 80s driving in their car and that comes on and they're like, what is this? What is happening right now? And they're so specifically to the related to the context of the thing, and a little bit of that happening with Hamilton as well. Like the songs are very specifically specific to the story. I think part of what helped as well is that he did like the side concept album where actual sort of hip hop artists did variations on the songs that stripped some of the more specific story elements out of them. And those did get a lot of radio play as well. So it's an interesting phenomenon, but for all of its like attachment to hip hop culture and whatnot, the thing that's striking to me about it is that it is formally, very traditionally musical theater ish. And the comparisons to those 80s musicals like the Andrew Lloyd Webber or Les Mis, musicals, is that it's clearly heavily influenced by that particular era of musical theater. It's entirely sung through, not like your Sondheim shows where they're plays and then, or Sondheim, who harkens back to the Rodgers and Hammerstein model where they're plays with songs dropped in. Lin-Manuel Miranda is clearly sort of aligning himself more with that sort of 80s 80s version of musical theater, which is entirely sung through, like Cats, like Les Mis. And the album is, similar to those as well, the Hamilton soundtrack, because it's the entire play on the soundtrack, which was also the case, with Les Mis or Cats back in their day. You get the entire show on that soundtrack, which is fascinating. And it, I don't know that there's a more, going back to what we were saying, it's interesting to watch that become this like super consequential piece of art to younger people in particular. And I can't think, and to the way that it's created Lin-Manuel Miranda as a celebrity. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's anybody else in the history of American entertainment who is a comparable figure to that guy.
Barbara
right now.
Streisand is the closest in my mind.
Maybe, yeah, sure. That's a reasonable comparison, except that she didn't, come out of like she didn't write theater,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
no, yeah. But in terms of like, um, sort of instant flash in the pan, you know what I mean? Um,
Well, and who was the writer of her own, I mean, the thing that's nuts about him is that he's not a great singer, but he's a good performer, you know what I mean? And he had ambitions as an actor, that were that he pursued parallel to his work as a songwriter and theatrical writer as well. That he didn't like choose. You remember? It's funny to watch TV shows from many years ago that Lin Manuel Miranda shows up in as a you know as a featured player in, like the episode of The Sopranos where Christopher is in Los Angeles trying to make a movie, and and Lin Manuel Miranda has this little featured moment where he's a bellhop at a hotel. This is the same episode with Lauren Bacall and it getting pushed over into the streets by the thugs. But he has this funny little moment. It's like, yeah, Lin Manuel Miranda was just like a jobbing actor, while at the same time he was working on becoming, you know, the most important musical theater figure in the century. I mean, or in the 21st century so far. It's fascinating. And then to have created this weird little niche for himself where he's a legit celebrity,
mhm.
um, primarily for a piece of theater. I mean, he's obviously stepped into some film stuff. It's interesting the marriage between him and Disney at this point too, because he's clearly, has a fairly is happy to have this fruitful partnership with them as well, between this and like writing Moana's music and singing on that soundtrack, and then also doing the Mary Poppins sequel. And so obviously he's happy to be working with them, the biggest entertainment company on earth / in history. uh it's a fascinating thing. One of the other so I mean that's all the sort of stuff surrounding it. What's striking to me about the material itself, it gets at something interesting about him as an artist to me, is he is sort of daring and avant-garde's probably saying too much, but he's, experimental and on the edge of, like you say, sort of drawing from these uh, artistically daring sort of theatrical trends, while at the same time being very mainstream.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I mean the material is mainstream, and
yeah,
the I mean it was like what a like a sort of New York Times bestseller book.
yeah, it's based on a was it is it Walter Isaacson in my no, that's
No,
not
it's
right.
not.
No, it's not. The other guy.
Yeah,
Yeah. Based on a book that was a bestseller
and it's
about
I mean for me it's um with another creator it's Schoolhouse Rock. You know you know what I
yeah,
mean.
it could be if it's not.
And and it certainly has those moments where like the sort of teacher part is almost Ron Chernow. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, the with the teacher parts are there like and passionately so, and he's just got enough balance that it doesn't become that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a result of his talent, right? He's
Uh-huh.
got a prodigious talent as a lyricist and as a songwriter as well. He was interestingly one of Stephen Sondheim's proteges. Uh, he consulted with Sondheim when they did that production of West Side Story with certain sections in Spanish as well. He worked with him on that, and I guess just worked with him in general. So he carries with him, and to have that imprimatur is a pretty impressive thing. Like obviously Sondheim is, as a songwriter, uh, incredibly respected, rightly so. And if if he was going to choose someone to like say, you know, uh, carry forth with this, right, to find a successor, he really picked the right guy. It would seem, and so it does make that go down easier. Like whatever didactic aspects to it there might be, work because it's just lyrically fun. I mean, he has that sort of Shakespearean thing, where he does the high low mix really well. You know, which is reaching for lofty themes and ideas, but also marrying it with pop culturally accessible. Also, he's not afraid to go for dumb jokes that that work and stuff. It's that's tough to pull off, and he really does it. I mean, he's an enormously talented person. But it is striking because it's all in the name of something that's fairly mainstream, and traditional in terms of its feelings about America. It's complicated, obviously, by the fact that there is some criticism of America writ large in there, um, but it's essentially sort of celebratory of the American dream and American potential in ways that weirdly put it out of step in some ways with the tenor of the moment, uh, which is interesting. Like there is this healthy, robust sort of criticism of Hamilton, which I think we're going to see more of in the coming weeks when it finally hits and becomes this object of cultural discussion, where there's going to be a heavy wave of pushback. Get ready for all of those think pieces, about why Hamilton is not good. And in that way, there's something very shrewd, I think, about putting it out right now too, or serendipitous maybe, because I think that Hamilton's always going to be very popular. It's going to go down in history as, um, as one of the most important pieces of pop art of this century, certainly. But the window for when Hamilton as it exists right now could have been created and come out like is closing.
And it was narrow to begin with.
Yeah, that's
It
right.
it is, and to me, I mean, to me, it's it's um it's Obama art. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it
like
is.
in the way that the and I feel this way actually about the Kennedys too. I mean, there was a window of time when the 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 Kennedys in the White House occupied sort of national symbolic status, and the art that was generated at that time. And I know Hamilton was started
Yeah,
before
but
then, but it took
it,
shape.
yeah.
It was given voice. It was given a platform. Literally at the White House, um,
Yeah.
the in ways that could only have happened in the Obama
During that moment,
administration.
yeah.
Yes.
And part of its ascendancy in popular culture, I think, was very much tied to that moment. This what Obama's presidency really represented, culturally, artistically, was this, and as a political figure, he married a sort of old fashioned idea of America and American patriotism with a new aesthetic presentation. part of which is like so basic that it's stupid. It's like, he was a black man. This is aesthetically different. But, you know, it recontextualized all of that, but also all of that sort of traditional stuff, those traditional ideas about, you know, what America stands for, and reclaimed them, you know, and said, you can still have all of this, and also move forward into the future. That was the promise of Obama's presidency. And, you know, that clearly seems to have been rejected by the culture. That idea, both on the right from people who refuse to sort of buy into that idea in the first place, but also on the left from people who I think, you know, got their feelings hurt, to put it glibly, you know, and really sort of were disabused of their idealism. And, you know, now it's interesting at this moment, like Obama is, and I think that honestly, Hamilton is going to occupy a similar position, which is to say Obama is beloved on the left, particularly, but also broadly, like from non-ideological people. People have good thoughts and feelings towards him generally. You know, absolutely despised on the right, but what are you going to do? That almost isn't worth talking about. But the response to people on the left who feel warmly towards him, but really, well, most feel warmly towards him. Some feel he's problematic. And on the sort of bleeding edge of the left, they absolutely despise him. Right. I mean, if you go and look at sort of, you know, sort of American Marxist Twitter, and a lot of the sort of Bernie people, they just hate Obama so much. And I think that Hamilton is going to interestingly sort of occupy a similar place, which is to say, will be broadly beloved and like have a warm place in the hearts of many people on the left, and interestingly on the right as well. Like Hamilton, I think, is broadly more popular than Obama. But absolutely despised by, you know, by a certain contingency of people, largely on the left. And I think that that's where Hamilton's going to land right now, because for all of its, you know, anybody who doesn't know about this in Hamilton, and I can't imagine anyone listening to this doesn't know, but I'll say it anyway. You know, the interesting conceit of Hamilton from a staging perspective is that all of the roles of the Americans and the people on the American side, who were all white people, are played by people of color in the production. And it does something weirdly, you know, it is a radical idea that race becomes a signifier of radicalism, right? That's the idea. And the only people who are white in the show, well, not the only people, there are dancers who, but the only named characters who are played by white people are on the British side in the production, which again, I don't know you could get away with something like that necessary. I mean, it's doing something dangerous in an interesting artistic way with race, you know, as this signifier of meaning, right? I mean, that's a risky, interesting piece of staging and an artistic conceit that would feels much more dangerous in this moment of heightened awareness of race. Again, another thing that you feel like Hamilton got in under the wire, being able to do what it did there at all. I mean, not that, you know, it's doing it in such a way where it's not like where the politics of it aren't necessarily bad, but still it's striking to, you know, use, I don't think that people would like cancel Hamilton because of that, or cancel Lin-Manuel Miranda, but it feels much more dangerous. Like just from a funding perspective, I think a lot of people will be like, I don't know. The backers might not feel quite as eager to put something out there that, grabs race as this, conveyor of meaning in the same way that they were willing to in the Obama era, where I think people were a little bit more willing to be experimental about stuff like that.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I just think there, um, there's every reason to think that after the Trump election, which I think actually Hamilton had something to do with on a sort of poetic level, um, the um, the uh, the conversation would have been different. The reaction would have been different. And when you say it got in under the wire, I think that's exactly right. I think it was a good bet to make um, during the Obama administration, and the same bet would maybe not pay off at this time.
Well, I just think that, speaking as somebody who is currently sort of developing a thing uh, that touches, really explicitly on questions of race and has certain sort of sociological uh, elements to it that suddenly are controversial. That's a tough line to walk right now. And the people who fund things, there's a real open question about whether they're going to be willing to do that. I think that in the next few years, we are maybe gonna end up with a spate of entertainment that feels much more safe than some of the stuff that has been done. I think that the people who make who just not the artists themselves, but the people who fund film and television are going to want to take a great big step back from controversy over the next few years. It's an interesting thing right now to see all of these TV and TV shows particularly, and distributors of television shows pull any episodes that are potentially offensive along racial or ideological lines, like anything that might get people really angry. South Park has removed all of their religiously offensive, not all of their religiously, but a lot of their religiously offensive material just this last week. And there's been this whole spate of television shows that have been memory holding episodes that had blackface in them, which there are so many of them, weirdly, that it's like so many of them did that, all in this very specific way, which is we're going to show blackface in the name of showing how wrong and bad it is. It's like the portrayal of racist behavior in order to criticize racist behavior. That is suddenly, everyone's like, we can't do this. This was a bad idea. Tina Fey shows 30 Rock and Kimmy Schmidt both did that, but also Community pulled an episode. Mr. Show with Bob and David, Bob Odenkirk and David Cross's show, they did one for Netflix, like a reboot of that had a sketch in it that had blackface in it. And all of these have been yanked. In every case, the whole point of it was, this is offensive and disgusting. Look how clueless this person is for doing this thing. The punchline being like, this is awful, but, nobody wants to defend that anymore. Understandably, this is a moment where, well, it's like what we were talking, well, it doesn't matter. Nobody wants to touch that. And, And so for all of that, it's like I think that it just shows this interesting kind of, you know, uh, lack of will to do something that is potentially offensive or controversial. I think that that's going to go across, the entertainment industry. And again, is one of the reasons that Hamilton is going to, I think, stand out as this interesting, odd little artifact that, was at the same time as was both mainstream and also daring in interesting ways. Just peeked out there. And then
Well, that's one of the interesting pieces of this is to go back to Disney is how this piece came up, in sort of how it was developed versus its current reception now, where
right.
Disney has decided that it's it fits
putting
the
its
brand. Do you know what I
imprimatur on
mean?
it.
And
Yeah.
it's
And it
there's
doesn't feel weird at all. It
no.
feels entirely on brand, but that's amazing.
Yep,
Yeah,
it's
you're right.
unbelievable.
I mean, this thing that really was developed as this extremely daring, um, you know, uh, piece of experimental theater, uh, that went from the public to Broadway in New York. Um, from this sort of marginal place to the most mainstream of mainstream, championed by, again, the largest entertainment company on earth slash in the history of the world, and is like they're pushing it hard. Like those commercials that they have for the broadcast for the show, that they're putting up, it like opens with the Disney castle. You know what I mean? I mean, they are like, you know, Walt Disney bringing you Hamilton, and uh, and that's what's, it's just fascinating because Hamilton couldn't happen today, if it was starting from scratch. And yet it is as mainstream gets, is still wildly beloved and will be for decades. It's this interesting contradiction, right? This thing that you couldn't do again, and yet is the most is the sort of most mainstream distillation of popular culture in the world at this moment. I mean, it's like this. It really sort of encapsulates the weird split personality psychosis of
Well,
our
and
moment.
and it's also, I mean, to be uncharitable for a minute, this is what white people do. They they take good art by people from of other places, and I don't mean places. I mean of
No,
other
other
backgrounds, of other
cultures.
skin color, of other cultures, and they make it theirs. And so some of the move to Disney is I'm glad it's blessed by the creator. Don't get me wrong. I wish the guy
And more than
billions of
blessed by the
dollars.
creator. I mean, Lin Manuel Miranda has walked into a willing partnership
Yeah,
here.
yeah. I'm thinking more broadly than Disney. Actually, I mean, good for Disney, given its history, and taking the opportunity here to rewrite some of that history. I think is good for them. I have no complaints whatsoever. But one of the alarm bells that always goes off for me with Hamilton these days is the sort of whiteification of the response to it, not the piece, but like, um, it's yuppie high school kids competing for tickets at $650 a pop in the suburbs. That's the problem. And actually, the great thing about the Disney Lin Manuel release right now is that it's once again, like the piece itself, subverting that.
Yeah, I mean, he has spoken to that actually as well. Like part of his reason for doing the album, the soundtrack album, the way that he did, was that he was a theater kid, he said, growing up, but his family didn't have lots of money to go see shows on Broadway. And so the main way that he engaged with theater was through the soundtracks, which again, in that moment means the Les Mis soundtrack, means the Phantom of the Opera soundtrack, means Cats, means like, as well as like older ones. But the contemporary ones from when he was a child were these like sung through soundtracks that had the entire show on them. And that was how he, became conversant in the form. And so there is a real, that was part of the reason that he wanted to put out the soundtrack the way that he did, to make it available to everybody who he knows aren't going to be able to afford $400 seats to see his shows. But yeah, the Disney Plus move really is that too. It's like families who could never conceivably afford tickets, which are cheaper now than they ever have been, but still not cheap. If you're going to see touring productions of that show, can afford a $7 to $9 a month subscription to Disney Plus and are going to see it there where it will be forever. And that is interesting. I mean, the racial aspect of this is fascinating. And a lot of the pushback that you see right now, I remember reading someone on Twitter who, said he's always skeptical of any time that a white audience like wildly embraces a piece of art from people of color. He always becomes very suspicious of it, of that art, and has to go back and see what is it about this that is attracting all these people. And he says inevitably he finds something to not feel very comfortable with. And the fact of it is, like, Hamilton really does celebrate America in this really unironic and unambiguous way. Like, an America that's flawed, yes, but again, it's the Obama approach to America, that the American dream is still good and worth believing in. But, for all of our flaws and whatnot, the core of it is still good. And that is fundamentally at odds with a lot of what you see in the streets right now in our current moment. The idea that America is not fundamentally good and needs to be remade in fundamental ways. That's the message of this moment. And it seems to be, and so it's interesting, Hamilton is this thing that is beloved of white people, and it's not like, I mean, I don't want to overstate this, and I'm obviously not a person of color, so I'm not somebody who's speaking for anybody, but if you look around, you can see that there is a little bit more ambivalence portrayed by, in certain communities about it, for all that. I mean, you remember, like, what's fascinating is like the number of, and I think that clearly the people involved in the show have some, feel again, some ambivalence about this, but it's a show that's beloved by, mainstream political figures on the right. I remember all of the stories about how, like, this is Dick Cheney's favorite musical, right? He loves Hamilton when he went to see it. And like the string of Republican politicians, which is not to say all Republicans are white and that all Republicans like hate black people or anything like that. But the people who made the show are self-identified unambiguously on the left in terms of their politics. So it's fascinating that this show was clearly beloved by people on the right. And then you have John Bolton releasing his book this week, with, and the title is a reference to Lin-Manuel Miranda's, song from Hamilton, The Room Where It Happened. I think that it just captures the weird ambivalence of this moment. But I also think that that's like due to the fact that Miranda's like illustration of politics and the way that politics works is actually something that politicians recognize as being true, like regardless of their political affiliation. If we're going to sort of take it away from the ideological, that song in particular, The Room Where It Happens, I've heard many politicians and also media personalities who, follow politics say that it's the most sort of honest encapsulation of the drive to be in politics and the way that politics works that they've ever heard. I remember John Dickerson from 60 Minutes, political reporter, with a storied history, said that at the time he said, I've never seen like the idea of politics, the way that politics works condensed in such a, coherent and snappy way before. And I mean, that's part of, and Lin-Manuel Miranda's father was a politician. So, I mean, that all makes sense that he has a grounding in that, but it's an amazing piece of art. You can have conversations about it forever. That's great.
I saw it on Broadway. I guess it's been 3 years ago or so. John Lithgow was like 5 rows down from me with his grandkid.
That's wild.
And yeah, I mean, I knew the whole show at that point. I was expecting to be whelmed,
yeah.
Just because I knew it. I'd seen the photos. I knew how it was going to be staged. And there's still a sequence in Act 2 from Hurricane to Burn that just took the air out of the room. Just phenomenal.
That's interesting because like the staging must be something pretty special on there, because that's actually kind of a lull in the soundtrack, mm-hmm. that sequence. So I suppose it makes sense that they must be doing something pretty impressive with the staging to make that.
Well, the staging's really great. They have concentric turntables that go in opposite directions, and so they can do some things with Hurricane there that were pretty fantastic. But not all. But also, despite having all of that technology, still sort of hitting the minimalist, checking that box.
Yeah.
But I found it just becomes less about flash there and more about pretty hard look at a couple of those characters, and just really great.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see it. I have not seen the show yet. We had bought tickets this year to see the touring company in LA. As I said, like it's the first time, I think this year is the first time that tickets really became something on par with what you would pay to see most shows, elsewhere. And then all the productions got canceled because of our horrendous coronavirus year. So I'll be seeing the Disney Plus one before I ever see it live. But that's okay. It'd be interesting. It's interesting the way that kids really are aware of it too. Like my 10-year-old daughter is super enthused to see it, and it's a object of tremendous interest with kids her age. Which again, has not been true of a piece of theater since the 80s, I think, like that you could find something.
Yeah,
like
all in movies.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, but but that's the thing. It's like, it's comparable to sort of the way that kids in the 80s and 90s, like, were obsessive about Les Mis or Phantom of the Opera or Cats. But on a much larger scale, right? I mean, because that was sort of still, for all the popularity of those pieces of work, were still confined to, theater nerds or, the people who played those soundtracks forever, and that's just not where we are right now. Is there anybody else who's like comparable in terms of like anything else in theater? I mean, there was a weird little boomlet. Like people tried to sort of suggest that Dear Evan Hansen also had some comparable sort of effect on pop culture among teenagers, but I'm sort of skeptical of that claim. In fact, they actually embrace it. Like Lin-Manuel Miranda did a series of sort of supplementary songs for the soundtrack that he released over the course of a year, that were variations or alternate songs that didn't make it into the show, or just different interesting things. And he was a whole medley, like combination of a song from Dear Evan Hansen and and one of the songs from Hamilton together, with Ben Platt, who is the star of that show, like singing with, was it Lin-Manuel Miranda?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Two of them singing together.
Yeah, I think for my money, Dear Evan Hansen is huge, and its impact is mostly theater.
Yeah.
And whereas I think Hamilton's impact is everywhere,
Yeah.
like all aspects of pop culture, and yeah, I mean, the only thing that I hear people singing, like I mean, are those two shows,
Yeah.
and Greatest Showman,
Which is also written by the Dear Evan Hansen
yeah.
guys.
And
The
it's
songs.
and
Yeah,
there, I
well,
mean, I don't know. There's you know, it's weird. It's weird how these musicals have infected things for the first time after a pretty sizable break. You know.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, again, like the last time that there was a bump like this, I think was Rent, and then there was just like nothing for a long time, and now this funny little boomlet. I don't know. It's hard for me to get a handle on the pop culture of the moment with like what kids are gonna like and stuff, but it's a strange mix of cultural influences that young people right now are absorbing. You know what I mean? Like this sort of odd, you know, theater geeky moment, combined with, you know, everything else that's happening in the world. It's like, I don't know. Taste in the next 20 years is going to be fascinating to see how that all like works itself out. But yeah, what do you think the chances are that Hamlet sticks around for the next, 60 years, that people will be doing that show?
60 years might be a little long, but
Might be.
I
And again, how old is Oklahoma?
yeah, well, it's older than that, right? It's like
Will this
80,
have,
70 years.
yeah, there are
So
productions of Oklahoma happening all
I
over
mean,
the place.
in terms of its important and importance and sort of um, as being a feature of study,
Hmm.
I think it's here forever. Um, I do wonder if I do think it will age. I don't
Right?
think it's aging yet, but
Yeah,
I do
well,
think
I
it
don't
will.
know. I mean, I think it is. I think it is already aging for some of the reasons that we've talked about. And the thing that I'm going to be the most interested to watch is when, community theater productions of this show start happening, and they will in the next 20 years or so, sometime in that period. High schools and community theaters and, theaters at all levels are going to start doing Hamilton. I am curious to see if the sort of the element of the racial element of the casting continues to persist. To what extent is that written into the text in a way that people are going to be compelled by the company to maintain? Because because there are plays that get published that way, right? Like this must be played by a person of X race, you know, or if it'll be entirely open. My suspicion, based on things that I've heard Lin-Manuel Miranda say, is that it will probably be left open. And then it will be interesting to see how the play plays when that ceases to be a dominant feature of its presentation. Because inevitably, it'll be difficult to maintain. It'll just, when it goes out into the world, given the extent of its popularity, it will be difficult to maintain the sort of racial makeup of the cast as currently constituted when it's being done in high schools in very, white communities. In addition to, other places where it is actually possible to maintain that. And I just think it'll be interesting. And that, being such a sort of locus of discussion around it initially, when that's taken out of the mix, what'll that do to the show? It's an interesting question. And one I suppose we'll find out, assuming that society continues to exist for the next 20 years, which is...
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I will see you in a couple weeks.
All right, dude. Have a good trip.
We'll talk about all of the things that I'm supposed to watch now.
Okay. Have fun. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.